video. There we go. Get my stuff all set up. Okay, I am actually really happy to be teaching this class tonight because um, it's the end of a unit that will then segue into a new unit. I want to explain what our path is here over the next few weeks. We're going to finish talking tonight about institutional Judaism, i.e., the various institutions that we've spoken about, with one more that we still have to mention, review what they were in light of changes that they had to face. That'll bring that to a close. Notice how they helped Jewish people in the early days of the United States, people come to America. And then starting next week, we're going to go back to just before 1917. We're going to learn, without the Jewish aspect, I put this in the message, I just want to kind of expand, what led up to World War I. And many people are aware of the murder of Archduke Ferdinand, which basically was the catalyst. But what brought that about? What was the Black Hand? What was all this stuff? So we're going to learn some regular history, probably take us at least one, probably two classes just to do that. And then we'll put the Jewish aspect into it, how they participated, the Jews participated, how they were involved in the war, how it affected Jewish life. We'll come back to that. So that's the mahalach, as they say in the yeshivish world, the path we're going to take. So where we left off last time, which is quite a while now, was talking about an organization which I'm sure you've heard of in the United States called Torah U'Mesorah. It's not Torah U'Mesorah, it's Torah U'Mesorah. It was founded later than the other organizations we were talking about, like as Hayas and JDC and others. Those were the late 1800s, early 1900s for the most part. This was founded in 1944 by Rabbi Shraga Feivel Mendelovich, who becomes critically important in the future institutions, which we'll talk about momentarily. And the question is, what was the purpose of this particular new organization? It was a response to a certain area of failure of the early immigrant absorption process. What happened was the Jews were basically remember, they're coming from Eastern Europe and Russia. They had and many of these people had a Jewish education. They had a cheder, they were surrounded by their own people. Now they're being thrown into the milieu of America with a different language. There's no day schools. There's no cheder kind per se. So the children are going to public schools. They relied on weak afternoon Talmud Torah type system, what we nowadays call Hebrew school. And because of that, there was mass assimilation. It is, without a doubt, the number one foundation of any Jewish community is Torah. I don't know how many of you are aware, for those who live here in Ma'ale Adumim, I'm sure you are aware that the Mitzpendevo neighborhood, the anchor, began it all, was Yeshivat Birkat Moshe at the top of the hill, and it just kind of spread from there. A community that's lacking Torah is without a base. At the same time, the Gemara tells us it's better to live in a city in Israel that has idol worshippers than to live in Chutz La'aretz with Talmidei Chachamim. So I guess you can put that in your hat and smoke it. In your pipe, it's not, don't put in your hat. In any case, what was Torah U'Mesorah's role? What did they, through Shraga Feivel Mendelovich, what was his ideas here? He wanted and did build a network of day schools. What was a day school? It was full-time Jewish education. It meant that they were learning the Torah subjects. They were learning the secular subjects. They were training teachers. They were training administrators. And what purpose was to reverse the processes of assimilation. Imagine take an average kid, 12 years old, 13 years old. It's 1944. Even before that, it's in the early 40s, late 30s. And they come to America. There's no structure as far as school. They're being surrounded by their non-Jewish neighbors. Nothing wrong with them. Just saying that's what they were in. Non-Jewish neighbors, public school, and the framework of Torah is gone. So this is, and they are therefore assimilate. The good word in Hebrew. No hitbolelut. Hitbolelut is assimilation. Like the word belila, like a mixture. By the late 20th century, late into the 1900s, there were hundreds and hundreds of schools across the United States. I'm not talking about other countries. This whole this section has been dealing with the United States. And educating over 170,000 students. Every day school, every Jewish day school in the United States can trace its roots one way or another back to Rav Shraga Feivel Mendelovich. Not only that, he was instrumental in founding TELS in Cleveland. He was instrumental in founding Torah Vodaas in New York. He was instrumental in founding Chaim Berlin and Yeshiva Gvoha of Lakewood. All these name brand institutions, which have given the world many, many Talmidei Chachamim, started with this one man's idea. His vision was Torah coming to the United States. And significant because the next phase of immigrants that started to come, it was not about survival anymore. Now it was about continuity. They came with, I'll give you, it's not even lahavdil. Some of you I know made Aliyah 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and you came, there was the Merkaz Klita, and you had to go to all these different places on your own and find out how to do these things. And it was a balagan. And then along came a Nefesh Ben Nefesh, which unfortunately was born out of tragedy. If you don't know the story, Rabbi Fass's nephew was murdered, and over Shabbat, literally sitting in a park between him and Tony Gelbart, they founded, we were speaking, they were going to talk for 15 minutes, they spoke for 4 hours, and the concept of Nefesh Ben Nefesh was born. When we made Aliyah, B'ezrat Hashem next month, 17 years ago, the experience was completely different. It was a turnkey operation. We landed, as many people know, we were Israeli ready. We had our Tudat Zehut number ready. We just got it the next day, and we came with all this information and where to go, and it streamlined. So it was not a matter of trying to figure everything out from scratch. You were handed something on a silver platter. Similarly, hard word for me to say in English, the people who came in the first few waves of immigration to the United States, who faced this wasteland almost of a lack of Torah education, then the next waves after that were already walking into institutions. It already was the norm. Another system that came into play in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was known as the Jewish Federation system, which became massive. I'm sure you're all familiar from your former homes in the United States or North America. The concept of the federation. It started off first with local federations, which basically the purpose was to consolidate Jewish charities. So let's make up an imaginary idea. This is not factual. It's you're in the city, a city in New Jersey, and there are many gemachim. Gemach, by the way, stands for Gemilut Chasadim, or Gemilat Chasadim, Gemilut Chasadim for plural. There's a gemach for this, and there's a charity for this, and there's something for the people who came from Europe, and there's something that came from people from Russia, and there's another gemach for this, and there's dozens of these, and all these things also could lend themselves, of course, to some form of shenanigans. Along comes a group of individuals to form what becomes the Jewish Federation. The original purpose was only to consolidate Jewish charities. And it came about, which was one of the milestones of the early days of the Federation, was the formation of the UJA, or the United Jewish Appeal. That was in 1917. And that year, of course, is very significant, which we'll talk about starting next week about World War I. But again, its main function early on was just to centralize fundraising and distribution for Jewish causes. By the way, it was both domestic and overseas, which continues to this very day, the same kind of idea. They were the financial backbone of the Jewish community. They are the ones who helped fund some of the organizations we heard of already last time. The HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. They gave immigration, who helped with immigration assistance. Funding was channeled to them through the Federation, through the United Jewish Appeal. HIAS, as I mentioned, JDC, the Joint, which was providing overseas relief, local Jewish charities. The federations and the United Jewish Appeal helped not just the individuals, not just the communities, hospitals, orphanages, housing, job training, economic immigration, and also assisted people into transitioning into an American society. They also successfully, at least early on, were able to unify a Jewish communal structure. Now, what does that mean? Let's go back to the topic of a chief rabbi, which we talked about at length or a couple classes, Rabbi Jacob Joseph, who was declared to be the first chief rabbi in New York, which we know that unfortunately, even though it was a disaster in the end, it still gave birth to a lot of good things afterwards. But the idea was to kind of replicate the idea they had in the old country, which was they had a chief rabbi. They had the shtetl had the chief rabbi, the rabbi, and that's who they went to. He was usually the shaykhut, the rabbi, and the moil, and whatever else he was, the chief cook and bottle washer. And they tried to replicate that, and it didn't work. Here, the Federation is trying to replicate the idea of a centralized location of assistance to the community, and it was very successful. They were, in addition to that, they're also strategically placed to help in times of war, which was coming up then, of course, poverty, immigration, and they were really the infrastructure behind everything at this point. They didn't just help immigrants; they funded the entire system. A picture, for example, a mall. This is not a good example. It's the first thing that popped in my head. You have a mall that has 100 stores in it, and each one could be in its own location in a different place in the city, yet they combine them all into one building. They all pay rent to one place, I'm making this up, and there is a manager who manages the building that not each one has to worry about buying their own toilet paper for the bathrooms and for the supplies. They're able to centralize the purchasing. Again, it doesn't work like this in every mall. I'm just making this as an example. The Havdil, this is what's happening with the Federation slash UJA, United Jewish Appeal, that you have all these gemachim and you have JDC and you have Hayas and you have all these other things and Torah Masorah eventually. But what's bringing them together financially as the ma'arechet, in a marachti fashion, in a system-wide connection, is the whole idea of the JD of UJA and the Federation. I want to put on the screen. Let me find it here. 1 second. Give me 1 second. I want to just find a document I put together here. I'll share with you as soon as I find it. One history class. No, putting it all. Here it is. Okay, got it. And that goes down to there. That's the second one. Okay, good. Let me put screen share here for 1 second. Share. I want to share Coming to America, putting it all together. Okay. This is a kind of a summary of what we've talked about. And the reason I'm showing this to you now is that how things are going to change as we move into the next step for all of these different organizations. We talked about the JDC, and this is basically the organization we talked about. And what was their role regarding the early immigration process in the early days? So again, the Joint Jewish Distribution Committee helped Jews survive in Europe and prepare to emigrate. Remember, emigrate means to leave. Immigrate means to come into the country. HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, physically brought Jews into America and processed them. They were there on the ground at Ellis Island and other places to help actually with that process. The Jewish Federation. Also the UJA, funded and coordinated all the services. The okay, so the OU, which we did not talk about directly, preserved religious life in the new environment. That was more of another step in the cohesiveness of the community. Now the UO or the OU, we grew up, by the way, in Chicago. We are called always the UO. I don't know why. The rest of the world called it the OU. It took me years to call it the OU. It was called the UO, I think, in Chicago because the original name of the organization was the United Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America, the UOJCA. And it loosely was to the network of shuls. Of course, it became a massive different organization, which we're going to talk about a little bit. Torah Masorah was rebuilding long-term Jewish continuity through education. So these were the original mandates, the original jobs, the original purposes of these various organizations. Now, Let's assume for a moment you are living. Let me just put something back here for me. Got that here. Okay. You are living in a time period where you're living in, say, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. You're a blacksmith, and your profession is to make horseshoes. Or you're living in 1982, and you're deciding there's a new technology coming out of videotapes, 1980, 1981, 1979. And there's VHS and there's beta. You try and decide where this is going to go. You decide with VHS, and this, the technology, the future, this is the next 50 years, the technology is going to be VHS tapes until, of course, the CD player comes out and then the Walkman comes out. And things get smaller and smaller and faster. When I bought my very first computer, home computer, it had a 1 gig hard drive and it cost me $2,000. Now you can go to a gumball machine and buy a hard drive with like a terabyte of space for $50. Maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration. What's my point in this background? Things evolve. What was the most important job? You know, again, if you're in the 1800s, being a blacksmith, there was like having a gas station. It was like having a musach today, a garage where you fix cars, because it was part of the transportation. People got around whether they were riding on horses or they were using horses to draw carriages or they're using animals in the field. But that was what you needed to do, and that was your profession. Your profession went by the wayside, though, except for a small percentage. Obviously, there's still horses, but every time a new technology came out, it was defined by the old technology. For example, I just mentioned this in a different class not that long ago. For example, we talk about cars. When cars first started coming out, there had to be, and the speed of technology was, all right, we're going to come to that actually about the speed of technology. Thank you. Cars, when they first came out, they needed a way to describe the speed. They couldn't say it goes 22 miles an hour, which would have been fast in the early days. They had to talk about the power of the actual engine. And they decided they're going to refer to it in horsepower. You ever think about that? Oh, the car's at 22, I don't know, 10 horsepower. It meant that the power of the engine was the equivalent of having 10 horses pull your car. That's where the word comes from, horsepower. When they went from using candles to light or oil lamps to light a building and a street, they went to electric lamps. At least the incandescent bulb was referred to as the strength of candle foot, so that it had like the power of 20 candle foot power, which meant that 1 foot away, it was the amount of light that 20 candles would produce. If you look online and you look some of these spotlights you can buy, like to put outside your house, not just the little things you could attach, but something that's very bright that you're going to use somewhere in a forest. Like 500 candle foot, which you think about that, putting 500 candles in one spot, that's the amount of light it can generate. So every time you have a new technology, it's being defined by the old technology. Now, you're mentioning that in the comment about the speed. So the reason I do want to mention that, this is like a parenthetical thing, not about what we're about to talk about now. The Chafetz Chaim, Zichrono Livracha Zatzal, said something very interesting. He said, how are you going to know when Mashiach is coming? How do we know? What's one of the signs? So evidently one of the signs is that things speed up. And where does he get that idea from? He says that we are expecting it to be a 6,000-year cycle, and then to be the 7,000th year or before, it's going to be Mashiach. Where's he get that from? The concept of 6 days of a week, and then Shabbat. Now, picture number 6, the 6,000th year, which we're in. We're in the 5,787 or 86. We're getting to 87 soon enough, it will seem. So we're in the 6,000th year. Now, if you compare each 1,000 years leading up to Mashiach to a day of the week, what's the craziest day of the week? It's Friday, right? You have to get that and picture an early Shabbat too. Put the stuff away, clean the house, get your shower, get the shoulder, whatever, and cook the food. Everything hurries up. The speed in the house, the pace in the house changes to something much more rapid than in a regular weekday. Chafetz Chaim said this is a mashal for prior to Mashiach. He says when Mashiach is about to come, at the time period before Mashiach, things will speed up. Now, how long did it used to take to get from the United States to Israel? Maybe a couple of weeks by boat, maybe longer, probably all by ship. Then you went to an airplane, which depending how many hours where you're flying from and to. So let's say rounded up, it's 11 hours, 10 hours of flying. The speed with which we were all in high school, when you were in high school, if you were in the United States, to do a research project meant you went to the library, you found the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature, you took it off the shelf, you found the article you're looking for, you went to the librarian, you went to find the microfiche. These are all terms, by the way, people under 45, 50 will not have a clue what we're talking about. And you looked it up, and then you found the little article you needed. It may have taken you 45 minutes to an hour. Now what do? We take the phone and say, even just, you don't have to type. Say, okay, Google, and blah, 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 and you have what you need. Things speed up. So just as a parenthetical statement, that's one of the proofs, according to the Chafetz Chaim, that we're in the Erev Mashiach time, which we obviously are anyways, but that's a different story. Okay, now in the parentheses, let's come back to here. The purpose of talking about all these ideas of changes in technology and keeping up with the times are the idea that these organizations that we've been talking about, all of them had to at some point redefine themselves because, 1 second, sorry here, someone messages me, no. Okay, because things changed. Things were not static in the United States or anywhere in the world. Things normally change. That's how life moves on. So what I want to talk about for a little bit now are the changes these organizations went through to reinvent themselves to be relevant. If there were a person were a money changer and they changed rubles into lira in early Mandate Palestine, they wouldn't have much of a job today. First of all, be all cryptocurrency, which I don't understand what that is, but that's okay. So the early role of the JDC, let's kind of go back down to JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, or just known as the Joint. The early days, they were primarily an outlet for, as we said, American Jewish philanthropy abroad, supporting family and communities that were left behind. And it helped to unify the different immigrant groups and to feel part of a single Jewish American collective. But they had to grow because the JDC eventually became less and less about family back home in the Alta Heim, in the old country, but more about global Jewish responsibility. Americans started to see themselves not as refugees, but as benefactors. There's only one people, that's a lowercase p, on planet Earth that refugee status has been inherited, and that's the so-called Palestinians. So you can have 50 million refugees out of three people, which is kind of crazy. By the late 20th and into the early 21st century, the JDC is operating almost entirely outside the United States, which when you think about it, their original mandate, their original job was within the United States, sending things out. Now they're mostly today outside the United States. In America, their role still is fundraising, consciousness building about Jewish values, and connecting American Jews to within when there's global crises. So they went from, and some do with each one of these organizations, the from and to. They went from an emotional lifeline to the lands that were left behind, to an expression of American, Jewish, global leadership. I remember asking, before we met Aliyah, I remember asking someone from Nefesh B'Nefesh, at what point do you stop helping an Oleh? And the response was actually quite interesting, was when the Oleh doesn't need us anymore, meaning they're there whenever an Oleh would need them. I thought that was a very interesting answer. But the truth is that most people make Aliyah, even nowadays with Nefesh B'Nefesh, at some point do not rely on them as much as they may have for the first year. We relied on them heavily the first few months. They're extremely helpful. I'm still very involved with a couple people there with certain projects. But they're not as relevant in my life and people have been here for many years as they are for people who are just getting off the boat, so to speak, today. So the same thing was happening with the JDC as well. Hayas, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. Just think about that. From the 1880s to 1924, they were the front door to American Jewish life. Again, they met people, the Jews at Ellis Island. They helped them enter legally into this country. And Jews in the United States were still, for the most part, immigrants or a society of immigrants helping immigrants. Again, go back to the early days of the state of Israel when people were coming on Aliyah, whether it was the pre-state Israel or post-state Israel, when that was before May 1948, Tafshin Chet, or after. It was part of the aid that was given, besides from the government itself. First, it was the government in waiting, and then the actual government were the immigrants themselves, because they'd been through it. Look, the same thing happened with us when we came and landed in Ma'ale Adumim. The people that were most helpful to us early on were people who had made Aliyah quite a long time ago. They knew what we were going through, and they understood, and were very helpful to us, and grateful to everyone to this very day for that. But a turning point came about in 1924. Now, keep in mind, this is also between the wars. This is between World War I and World War II, which we're going to go to next week, Bezrat Hashem, because there was a critical break. Mass Jewish immigration, for the most part, at this point in 1924, comes to almost a complete stop. HIAS loses its reason for existence almost overnight. In other words, if my job, let's say my job is bringing groups to Israel, and then there's no way for a person to get to Israel anymore, God forbid. There's no planes, no boats, no anything. I'm out of a job, right? So this is what kind of is happening with HIAS at this time. So what happens? Now, by the middle of the 20th century, it took them a while for them to gather themselves. They are now, at that point, starting to assist later, of course, after World War II, helping Holocaust survivors, DPs, displaced persons. They reinvent themselves to become more of a refugee agency, advocating for immigration rights, asylum seekers, by the way, not just for Jewish people. So for that group, for HIAS, they went from a Jewish self-help immigration society to a universal approach to refugee advocacy, but organized within and rooted in Jewish history. Again, they don't help only Jews, even though the name would sound like it, but there's a broader clientele that they deal with as well. Let's talk about the OU, the Orthodox, originally called the UO, the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America. Their early role in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, so let's say from 1898 when they first were founded until sometime in the 30s, was to help immigrants preserve their orthodoxy. Remember, that was, as far as religious-wise, the greatest challenge was remaining Orthodox. We talked about this, the idea of, as we all know, people would have 52 jobs because they get a job and they get fired on Friday because they couldn't come in on Saturday. So, but what they did help to do, and this eventually becomes part of the legacy of Rabbi Jacob Joseph, was the kashrut standards. They invented the concept of synagogue networks. But at this stage, Orthodoxy was still very fragile, very defensive, and it could have teetered very much so and collapsed, God forbid. By the mid-20th century, there's massive, which we talked about, we were mentioning about Rev. Shaga Feivel Mendelevich and Torah Masora. They're facing massive assimilation problems, and the OU has to change their approach. What happens with them? They, number one, become a major national religious authority. A very large percentage of the reason is that they become a dominant force to this very day in kosher certification around the world, not just the United States. It's not a local hashgacha, it's literally around the world. Millions of products that when I say products, it includes also enzymes, what goes into one candy bar, what goes into one jelly bean can be what you see on the list of ingredients, trust me, is not what's only in there. It's a lot more than that. In any case, so they also become a leader in youth work, the establishment of the NCSY, National Council of Synagogue Youth, getting involved in political advocacy, adult education. I had some political advocacy many years ago when I was still in Chicago. I got a call from someone at the OU in New York. And at that time, Barack Obama, I'll hold back my comments on him. Barack Obama was as a state senator in Illinois. He was going to be speaking at one of the OU conferences where they do a lot of meetings with political people, and they wanted me to fly to New York to as a born and bred Illinoisan to introduce Barack Obama. So when before it's the whole thing started, having some coffee or whatever it is, he and I are literally just sitting at the table talking, just the two of us. And so I went to introduce him. He was not well known on the national stage yet. And when I introduced him, I said, when I was asked to come and introduce someone named Barack, I thought they were talking about Ehud Barak. That did not go over very well. I was not politically savvy yet. In any case, but to this day, a man named, his last name is Diamond, who is very involved, Diament. I think it's how he spells it. Nathan is like the top guy in their political advocacy. So the OU is not just a stamp that says you can eat their product and it's kosher, but they have branched out into so many areas. And again, a lot of it had to do with a need to reinvent themselves. So they went from like this structure, almost defensive posture to help the immigrants religiously to a confident institutional Orthodox institution helping shaping American Judaism. Similarly, again, I told you it's hard for me to say the word, is Torah Masorah. Originally, it was helping children of immigrants who were rapidly assimilating, collapsing Jewish education. They established a day school model. Again, when I say they, it became Torah Masorah, but started with Shraga Five of Men Beloved. And from the 1970s until today, have built around the United States, and then by having given birth, so to speak, into other places of the world, yeshivot, the Reshet of Beis Yaakov schools, teacher training. So they went, I would say, from almost an emergency situation that we have to save Judaism, the Jewish wasteland of Torah, to a primary, if not the one of the most important engines of Orthodox continuity in the United States. It's probably one of the most consequential shifts in American Jewish history was the idea of founding of a day school system, a yeshiva day school system, which has tremendous impact. I am grateful to God that in 1964 that they had not yet built a day school in Kansas City, Missouri, because at that age I was living with my family in Kansas City, with my dad being a assistant pulpit rabbi, and it was time for me to start school, kindergarten, because in our time no one went before kindergarten. And thank the good Lord above, Baruch Hashem, there was no day school yet in Kansas City, so we had to go to a city that had a day school now, Chicago, and the rest is history. The Federation, Jewish Federation of North America, again, we just talked about that just a few minutes ago, focused heavily on immigrant aid, poverty relief, settling Jews in the United States. But by mid-20th century, again, they also have to evolve because as the immigrants start to stabilize, the Federation has to start going into building of institutions, funding hospitals, schools, community centers. I know that there are varying opinions on federations around the United States. I will tell you, I have my own personal experience on many different levels with federation that first of all, like any institution, any large institution, there are issues. Of course there are issues. They're too left, they're too right, they cater to this part of the community, they don't care. Putting that aside, they have done incredibly well in being able to fund projects around the world for Jews. I've seen it with my own eyes in Ukraine, in Poland, in Hungary, in Russia. It's unbelievable, truly unbelievable what their work does. Also along with the joint, because a lot of that goes hand in hand with the joint, the JDC, of course. So later in the 20th and 21st centuries, the move of the Federation to become more focusing on Jewish identity, combating assimilation, helping to support the aging population is a very big one, especially outside the United States. They have what are called warm houses in many, what used to be the former Soviet Union, no longer, they call it now the FSU, the former Soviet Union. Remember, new technology defined by the old technology. And helping the aging population, community relations, advocacy. So they went from an immigration welfare network to a comprehensive manager of American Jewish communal life. What I want to do is I want to show you, let me put that on the screen here. Just a minute. Go back to here and share screen. One second, what's in the chat? Let me just see. Metro Council on Jewish Poverty. Yes, that's right. Again, every community had different names for their federation organizations and their organizational life. It followed a similar pattern in most, but just see some. Yeah, okay, good. Let me just share this here. One last chart. No, putting it all together. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, this is what we looked at before. What was their basic role? Now we're going to see what they were and what they moved to. So the JDC then was to aid Jews abroad. Now, when I say now, it means when they shifted to global Jewish responsibility, representing moral leadership. Again, you can argue with almost any one of these lines. This is just wording I put in here. The HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Jewish immigration, more focusing generally on refugee advocacy and universal ethics. It wasn't just about Jews any longer. It was helping people who needed help as refugees. The OU, their goal originally preserving Orthodoxy, which of course expands into Orthodox influence and religious confidence. Torah Masorah's goal was to stop assimilation. We need to stop assimilation. The only way we're going to do that was the Torah, eventually building the foundation for an entire network of Torah learning across the United States and beyond. And the idea, of course, of continuity. And finally, the federations were originally immigrant support, move into community management. By the way, you talk about big city. Again, I can only tell you my experience in Chicago. You had what were called blackout dates on the calendar. No institution was allowed to have a dinner or a fundraising thing during a certain time of the year because that's when the Federation did their drive. Federation gives out, as in many communities, millions and millions of dollars to Jewish institutions. And they have their own subcommittees in determining how that happens, which of course leads to some ill will in some cases and some non-ill will. But no one can tell you that they don't do great work in general for the community. So what we've done now, if we've looked at Jewish communal life, the last few classes, and the institutions that helped the Jews as they came to the United States and supported them when they got in, and over the next few years, how they morphed into different situations they were originally. As I mentioned at the beginning, what we'll do starting Bezrat Hashem next week, we're going to start moving into and transitioning into the topic of World War I. One class will be things, again, it's just going to be straight history. It's not going to be a Jewish bend yet. Leading into what led up to World War I, we'll go back to almost the time of Napoleon, Franco-Prussian War. We're going to talk, and by the way, if you hate history, it's okay. I'll make it painless, I hope. And then about World War I itself, what happened and what were the ramifications. And then, of course, we will go to the Jewish perspective after that, I'd say by the third class. My guess is it'll be about 6-7 classes on that whole topic. So that's what we have coming up. In the meantime, I wish everyone a wonderful day or evening, and it should also be a Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy.